The cursor blinked on the final line of the gateway protocol. I had just opened the secure window to transmit the last layer of biometric confirmation for a $100 million defense contract, a deal that took 9 months, 4 international trips, and 3 all-nighters to secure. Then the door opened. Gregory Carrington, the CEO himself, walked in without knocking. He wasn't alone. Behind him was a young woman in a powder blue pantsuit, clutching a tablet like it was a trophy. She looked barely old enough to rent a car. "Olivia," Gregory said, too casually. "This won't take long." I straightened up in my chair. "What is it?" He gave a strained smile. "We're initiating a leadership transition, effective immediately." I blinked, confused. "Immediately? I'm retiring at 5 today. I just need to—" "You've done more than enough," he interrupted, motioning toward the woman behind him. "This is Chloe. She'll be taking it from here, my niece." His niece. I turned my head slowly toward her. She gave me a wide, eager smile and reached out her hand like we were old friends meeting at brunch. "I've been shadowing digital strategy upstairs," she said brightly. "This is such an honor." I didn't move. The secure window was still open on my monitor, the cursor still blinking. Sat patiently next to the line that read, "Final voice verification required." Gregory cleared his throat. "Security will help with the transition. Your belongings will be sent to your residence." My mouth opened, but no sound came out. 28 years. 28 years I had given to this company. I had drafted that contract, built the client relationship from the ground up. And just 3 weeks ago, I was asked to personally oversee the final stage. And now, I was being replaced mid-shift by a niece in designer heels who'd never met the client. As I stood up, my chair still warm, I glanced once more at the screen. The system waited for me. It wouldn't respond to anyone else. But Gregory didn't know that. Not yet. "Congratulations, Chloe," I said, finally taking her hand. "I hope you know what you're walking into." Her grip tightened slightly, but her smile never wavered. I logged out without closing the system. Then I turned, picked up my blazer, and walked out without looking back. The cursor kept blinking behind me, waiting. I hadn't expected a parade, but I thought, maybe a card. Something simple, a handshake, a nod in the hallway. Maybe a, "Thank you, Olivia." But as I stood in front of my desk, the one I'd sat at for nearly 3 decades, I realized the goodbye had already happened, and I hadn't been invited. The floor was quieter than usual, which was saying something. No one made eye contact. Most of the junior staff pretended to be on calls, typing frantically into keyboards that weren't even on. The same people who once came to me for advice now couldn't lift their heads. I opened the top drawer of my desk, the one that had held my favorite pens, emergency Tylenol, and an old photo of our first executive team. There were only a few things worth taking now. The rest, they could have. I pulled out a worn leather notebook filled with client notes from over the years. Some names were no longer in business. Others, I'd helped grow from startup to global enterprise. Names Chloe had never heard of. Names Gregory had long forgotten. A cardboard box was already sitting by my chair. The office manager must have dropped it off while I was still in the meeting with Gregory. Efficient, cold, no bow, no label. I moved through the motions, pulling books, files, a framed certificate from a procurement conference in Zurich, when I noticed something. My nameplate was gone, on the glass wall outside my office, where it once read Olivia Meyer, Senior Director of Strategic Contracts. A new placard had already been mounted. Chloe Carrington, Director, Emerging Ventures. Emerging Ventures. They'd erased 28 years of service in one afternoon and slapped a title on it that sounded like an unpaid internship. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I sat down one last time in my chair and stared at the monitor. I logged in using my admin credentials and pulled up the master directory. I deleted nothing that would hurt the company, but I did clear out every personal document, old memo, and training material I'd ever written. The only thing I left untouched was a small, silent program buried deep in the system, Gateway Final. It looked like a basic script, harmless, forgettable, but it housed the biometric encryption needed to trigger the final payment release on the $100 million deal. It couldn't be accessed remotely, it couldn't be overridden, and it couldn't be recoded without a full system teardown. Only one person could use it properly. Me. As I shut down the screen, a ping echoed in the room, an alert from my now disconnected company email, which I'd forgotten to close. Subject: Congrats to Chloe. Sender: execcoms@carrington.com. Please join us in congratulating Chloe Carrington on her promotion to Director of Emerging Ventures. Her fresh energy and vision will lead Carrington into its next era of innovation. They'd sent it to me by mistake. For a brief second, I imagined responding. Something short, something venomous, but I closed the tab instead. What would I say? That I'd given them my best years while Chloe walked in with her last name and a LinkedIn account? I sealed the box shut and stood up. My heels echoed across the floor as I walked out, each step heavier than the last. No one stopped me. No one said goodbye. Bitterness burned in my throat, but I swallowed it down. Let them cheer for Chloe. They had no idea what they'd just locked themselves out of. I didn't think it could get more insulting than being replaced mid-shift. But the next 48 hours made it abundantly clear. Carrington wasn't just eager to erase me. They wanted to parade the replacement like a prize pig at a tech expo. My inbox, what remained accessible from my personal domain, was suddenly flooded with press releases and LinkedIn reshuffles. There she was, Chloe Carrington, all of 24, seated at my desk, my chair, even using the mug my assistant had given me 5 birthdays ago. One of the emails was a mass announcement from the executive comms team, sent to hundreds across the industry. Chloe Carrington officially takes the helm as Director of Emerging Ventures, having just secured a historic $100 million defense contract. Carrington Airseas welcomes her innovative lens and generational intuition in this bold new chapter. Attached was a high-res photo of Chloe beaming into the camera. Legs crossed in power pose, glitter heels glinting like they held currency. One arm draped over the back of my ergonomic chair. There was a barely visible line at the bottom of the email. Photo taken from Olivia Meyer's former office. Former. I clicked the link to the full interview. Some glossy finance startup had scooped her up already, running a profile titled, "The Gen Z Dealmaker Disrupting Defense Procurement." Disrupting? She couldn't even pronounce procurement. I watched, arms crossed, as the interview played. Chloe leaned slightly forward like a TED Talk speaker, radiating manufactured confidence as she spoke. This deal really came down to bold intuition, you know? When I looked at the numbers, I just knew it was the right time to push the envelope. The client, Constellia Aerotech. They were open to fresh vision. Constellia Aerotech. It was Constellia Aerotech, one of the most prominent names in government aviation logistics, and she'd butchered it on camera. She kept going, oblivious. I made the call to finalize terms earlier than planned. I didn't see the need to delay, not with how decisive we needed to be. I had to pause the video. She didn't make any calls. I did. She didn't sit through 12 weeks of midnight Zooms with the general counsel. I did. She didn't negotiate the compliance clause that took 4 rewrites and a 5-hour standoff. I did. She inherited the work and slapped her initials on it like a toddler using glitter glue. The worst part? People were buying it. Comments beneath the video ranged from inspiring young leadership to proof that legacy titles need to make room. I wanted to scream. Instead, I closed the browser and opened a message I'd been avoiding all day. A DM from Marcus Hanley. one of the few directors who hadn't looked away when I passed his office on the way out. "Marcus, saw the clip. This isn't right. We both know it." I didn't respond. What would I say? That watching someone parade around in my title, my achievements, and my office, while misrepresenting the very core of a deal they didn't even understand, felt like a mockery of everything I'd built? That the bitterness I swallowed yesterday was now turning into something sharper, something close to fury? I stood and walked to the window. Outside, the skyline of the city glittered under the afternoon sun, just like Chloe's shoes. Flashy, temporary, but useless in a storm. They had given her the chair. Yes, but they had no idea that the system under that chair, the one blinking in the background, quietly waiting for the final voice authorization, still belonged to me. She might hold the camera, but I still held the cord. And I wasn't done watching. The thing about systems built for security is, they're not easily broken. And I had made damn sure of that. 6 months before my final contract, Carrington's firewall suffered a breach attempt. It didn't make the news, but it shook us internally. A 0-day exploit had gotten as far as the finance backend. Gregory had brushed it off, calling it a reminder to tighten protocol. Then went back to polishing board decks. But I knew better. That breach had come too close to the contract pipeline. It wouldn't happen again, not on my watch. So I did something most directors wouldn't bother with. I designed a protocol inside the Gateway Final system, a biometric verification script with 3 levels of clearance: voice ID, terminal lock, geolocation match. In other words, the contract could only be executed from my machine, in my office, with my voice. Not because I didn't trust the company, but because I didn't trust the people who might eventually run it. Now, here I was, locked out of that office, watching from the sidelines as Chloe tried to pretend nothing had changed. Except the signature. But the gate didn't care about titles. It didn't answer to Director of Emerging Ventures. It didn't recognize a surname. It recognized me. That afternoon, my phone buzzed. An old colleague, Jacob, from IT. Young, quiet, painfully bright. He'd shadowed me on systems for years. If anyone could sense something was off, it was him. Jacob. "Olivia, did you set up biometric layers on Gateway Final? They're trying to push the contract and it's rejecting everything." My stomach dropped. "They're what?" "Yeah, Chloe's trying to sign off the final transfer, but the system's locked. It asks for full confirmation from origin signature source. No one here knows what that means." Of course they didn't. I'd embedded it myself. With the CTO's quiet blessing. She had signed off on my custom code when I told her it was insurance. But now, she was gone. Moved to a fintech startup last quarter. And Chloe had no idea the gate even existed until it stopped responding. "Did you tell anyone?" "Gregory's furious. He asked me to just reset it." I told him that's not possible without destroying the confirmation log. He told me not to say anything else. To anyone. I closed my eyes. They were scrambling. And the irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent my entire career building contracts that protected them from external threats. And now, I had become the internal threat they couldn't control. But here's the thing that twisted the knife even deeper. I couldn't fix this. I couldn't march in and explain the layers, or how the system required voice modulation, or that only I could authenticate the final line. That would mean admitting I still held the key and giving it away for free. They'd call it sabotage, claim I'd set a trap. I hadn't. I'd simply made sure no one else could pretend to be me. And now I was watching my legacy grind to a halt behind a gate they didn't even know existed last week. I stared out my window for a long while. I imagined Chloe, tapping impatiently, watching the cursor blink on her screen like it was broken. I imagined Gregory pacing in his office, barking orders no one could follow. And I imagined Jacob, caught in the middle, smart enough to know the truth, but young enough to be silenced with one line. Don't make this political. Powerlessness doesn't always look like screaming. Sometimes, it's silence, when you know everything and can do nothing. Sometimes, it's watching the gate you built, meant to protect everything, become the very thing that traps you outside. And the worst part? They still believed they were in control. I didn't plan to watch the company-wide livestream. Honestly, I tried not to. But when the calendar reminder popped up on my phone at 9:55 a.m., with the meeting titled Leadership Transition plus Strategic Milestone Announcement, curiosity got the better of me. I opened my laptop and clicked the link. The Carrington Airseas logo flickered across the screen, followed by a polished video montage, jets taking off, executives shaking hands, glowing headlines about historic growth and bold new directions. None of those headlines had my name on them, though I had written the first draft of half those contracts. The screen cut to the company's main auditorium. Gregory stood center stage, flanked by two large monitors and a backlit Carrington crest. He looked calm, practiced. A man who'd done this a dozen times before. But I knew that expression. It was the same one he wore during quarterly layoffs. Cold enthusiasm. "Good morning, team," he began, voice smooth. "Today marks the beginning of a new chapter in Carrington's story." I leaned back in my chair, waiting. Gregory continued. "As we move forward, we honor those who brought us here, but we also recognize that every organization must evolve. And sometimes, that means letting go of what was, no matter how foundational it may have been." Letting go. That's what I was now. A what? He smiled, nodded to the side. "It's my honor to introduce someone who represents the future of this company, a new generation of leadership, someone who embodies intuition, innovation, and speed. Please welcome Chloe Carrington." The camera panned to Chloe, walking across the stage in a white pantsuit, those same glitter heels clicking confidently with every step. She took the mic and beamed as if she hadn't just bulldozed 28 years of legacy without blinking. "Thank you, Uncle Greg," she said sweetly. Taking over the negotiations for the Aerotech contract was an incredible learning experience. I knew immediately that this deal was about more than numbers. It was about setting a tone, about showing clients that Carrington is agile, decisive, and future-facing. Learning experience? She hadn't been there when the deal nearly collapsed over a dispute about satellite access rights. She didn't fly to Brussels during the rail strike to meet with their legal counsel in person. She didn't sit through 12 back-to-back calls to renegotiate delivery terms during a global supply chain panic. But here she was, taking it all, my work, my voice, my chair, and dressing it in buzzwords like disruption and vision. Behind her, one of the monitors showed a timeline of key milestones. My name wasn't mentioned once. Even the project code had been renamed. What was once Project Orion, something I coined, was now Venture Sky. The screen cut briefly to a row of department heads. One of them, my former colleague, Lila Moreno, blinked back tears. She had been with me since the early days, a quiet anchor in procurement. The camera lingered just long enough to catch her wiping her cheek, then abruptly cut away to a wide crowd shot. Scripted, controlled. The applause that followed sounded hollow, even through my speakers. As the meeting wrapped, Gregory offered his closing remarks. "We appreciate everything our past leaders have contributed, but we must move forward. Stagnation is the enemy of progress." Stagnation. That's what I was now. To him, to all of them. I stared at the screen long after the broadcast ended. I'd spent my entire career giving this company the best I had, sacrificing holidays, sleep, even family dinners to hit targets and close deals. And now, I was erased, like I'd never existed. Not even a name, not even a line of thanks. Just a polite burial beneath corporate slogans and a pair of designer heels. I didn't cry, I didn't rage, but deep inside, something began to shift. Something cold, silent, and razor sharp. Because if they thought this was the end of my story, they were very, very wrong. The morning after the live stream, I sat at the kitchen table in silence, nursing a half-empty cup of coffee gone cold long ago. Outside, the sun was up, the city was humming, and people were rushing to jobs where they still mattered. I stared at my laptop, unsure what to do with the screen blinking back at me. A draft email had been sitting open for 2 days. It wasn't anything grand. No accusations, no bitterness. Just a simple thank you note I had written to one person who, throughout this entire exhausting deal, had treated me not as a vendor, but as a human being. Marcus Levinson, Senior Procurement Director at Constella Aerotech. He had been there from the first handshake. We had spent hours poring over contract clauses together, debating timelines, hashing out technical specs over midnight calls when one of us was always on a different continent. In a world of inflated egos and political chess games, Marcus had always been straightforward. He deserved a proper goodbye, even if no one else thought I did. I read over the draft again. Dear Marcus, thank you for the opportunity to work with you these past few months, despite the complexities. I truly valued the partnership and mutual trust we built throughout this process. I wish you all the best as the agreement moves into final implementation. Warm regards, Olivia Meyer. It was short, polite, clean, the kind of message I'd sent 1,000 times before. And yet, somehow, this one felt heavier than all the others combined. I hovered my finger over send for what felt like an eternity. Then I clicked. It left my screen like a whisper. I didn't expect a reply, especially not so quickly. But less than an hour later, my inbox dinged. From Marcus Levinson, subject, re. Thank you, Olivia. I'm confused. Are you no longer on the project? We weren't told of any transition. Also, something strange just came up. Our compliance team flagged a version discrepancy in the final contract PDF. There are line edits and formatting changes in the execution version we received yesterday that weren't present during our last joint review with you. We're pulling the metadata now. Can you clarify who's leading from Carrington at this point? My stomach tightened. They didn't know. No one at Carrington had told them I was out. Not a courtesy call, not a handoff, not even a CC'd email. And worse, they had altered the contract after my departure. That was more than disrespectful. That was dangerous. I began to type, then stopped. I couldn't say what I wanted to, not without sounding like I was undermining my own company, not without risking legal backlash. So instead, I replied with only this. Marcus, unfortunately, I'm no longer involved with the project. I wish I could offer more clarity, but I'm not authorized to speak on behalf of Carrington any longer. However, you may want to revisit the fine print at the bottom of page 42. Respectfully, Olivia. It was subtle, but if he looked, he'd find it. At the bottom of that page was a timestamp field. Confirmation pending via biometric gateway. Activation required from origin system. It had been in every draft since version 7. I'd fought to keep it in as a last line of control. Apparently, Chloe and her team didn't know what it meant, or didn't care. Marcus replied 15 minutes later. That clause is still there. We didn't sign off on that edit being removed. If Carrington can't fulfill that field, the contract isn't executable. Let me check with our legal and get back to you. I stared at his words for a long time. I should have felt triumphant, justified, vindicated, but I didn't. All I felt was empty, like I was floating through the fallout of a building I helped construct, watching others paint over my name while the beams started to crack. And for the first time in weeks, I said it aloud. To no one. They don't know what they're doing. And now, they were about to find out. It started with a ding, not the triumphant chime of a completed transfer, but a hollow, electronic thud, followed by silence. Then came the spinning wheel. Chloe leaned closer to the monitor. Lips pressed into a thin line as the screen flickered twice and returned an error prompt in stark red font. Gateway final. Authorization failed. Security environment mismatch. She clicked again. And again. Her manicured finger tapped the trackpad harder, as if the force would change the result. A small group had gathered behind her in the glass-walled executive boardroom. 2 junior assistants, a visibly sweating IT manager, and Gregory himself pacing in tight circles near the window. It had been exactly 19 minutes since Chloe tried to authorize the final transfer for the $100 million contract. 19 minutes of loading bars, soft system reboots, whispered side conversations, and Chloe's forced smile curdling into frustration. "Why isn't it going through?" she finally snapped, turning to the IT lead. "I did everything you told me." Brent, a pale, balding man in his late 40s, shifted nervously. "It's not that simple. The system is recognizing the request, but it's flagging a mismatch in the environment. The terminal you're using isn't registered as the origin node." Gregory stepped in sharply. "English, Brent." Brent swallowed. "The system is programmed to only accept final authorization from the original device where the contract was engineered and negotiated, Olivia's desktop, not just any Carrington terminal." Chloe blinked. "Well, can't you override it? Reassign the endpoint or something?" He gave a helpless shrug. "That requires root-level admin clearance, and Olivia was the only one with that status. She encrypted the gateway under 3-factor biometric lock tied to her user profile." Gregory's face twisted. "You're telling me we can't sign the biggest deal of the decade because of a computer setting?" Brent hesitated. "Not exactly. We can recreate the system, but it'll take days, possibly weeks. And even then, the client will have to re-authenticate on their end. We'd be starting from scratch." A vein pulsed in Gregory's temple. He pulled out his phone and made a call on speaker. "Get Jessica Nguyen on the line, now." Jessica had been Carrington's former chief security officer, now head of data privacy at a tech compliance firm across town. She picked up after 2 rings. "Greg, what's going on?" "I need you to confirm something," Gregory said. Breath clipped. "Did Olivia Meyer install a proprietary security script on Gateway Final that requires authentication from her original workstation?" There was a pause. Then Jessica sighed. "Yes. She implemented that after the back-end scare last year. You signed off on it yourself, remember? You called it excessive but clever." Gregory closed his eyes. "And there's no way to bypass it?" "Not without corrupting the contract log or triggering a system rollback," Jessica replied. "That gateway isn't just a lock, it's a vault, and she built it to shut down if tampered with." Chloe looked between them, her voice higher now. "Wait, so we can't finalize anything?" Gregory muttered something under his breath and stepped out of frame. In the silence that followed, Brent leaned over and whispered, "There's one more thing. The system keeps showing a secondary message." Chloe narrowed her eyes. "What message?" He turned the screen so she could read it herself. "Awaiting origin signature, Meyer.O." Chloe sat back in the chair, my chair, and stared blankly at the blinking screen. The tension in the room thickened. It wasn't just a technical failure anymore. It was a full-scale stall. The clock was ticking. The client was waiting, and the person who could fix it had been forced out 24 hours ago, across the city. In my living room, I received a single-word message from Jacob, the young IT analyst. "They're panicking." I didn't reply. Instead, I sat in silence, watching the cursor on my personal device blink with the same calm patience as it had the day I walked out. The gate was doing exactly what I built it to do. It was waiting for me. At 11:42 p.m., my phone rang again. This time, I didn't hesitate. I had been expecting the call, not from a colleague, not from Carrington, but from the only person left who still understood the stakes, Marcus Levinson. His name lit up my screen just as I finished washing my dinner plate. I dried my hands, sat down at the kitchen table, and answered with a calm that came from something deeper than confidence, something close to quiet revenge. Olivia Meyer. There was a pause, long enough to tell me he wasn't just calling to chat. "I read your message," he said, "and I looked at page 42. I didn't speak. I waited. "I need to ask you something," he continued. "Off the record, unofficial, and strictly as someone who's trying to understand what's happening on our end. I'm listening. Did you build a biometric gateway into the final contract confirmation system? One that locks execution to a specific terminal, voice print, and location?" I leaned back in my chair and exhaled slowly, letting the tension settle on his side of the line. "I did," I said. "It was authorized internally after the firewall scare last year. You and I reviewed the clause. It's in version 7. He cursed under his breath. "They didn't tell us anything. The Carrington team's been acting like the delay is a simple IT hiccup, but nothing is going through. They're stalling." "I'm not surprised." "And," he added, voice dropping, "the metadata on the final contract we received yesterday? It doesn't match what we signed off on. Someone altered the formatting, redated the approval log." "That would explain the versioning issue," I said. "They tried to slide in an unsigned clause," he muttered. "But that gateway stopped it cold. Your protocol flagged it as inconsistent. That's what it was designed to do." Another pause. I imagined him now, sleeves rolled, leaning forward on his desk in frustration and disbelief. "Olivia," he said carefully, "is Carrington trying to fake the finalization?" "I'm not in a position to say." He caught the meaning, and he understood the silence between the lines. "They've erased your name from the deal entirely," Marcus said, voice tight. "Every document, every chain, as if you were never involved, but the system still knows you were." I smiled to myself. "That system wasn't built to remember names," I said. "It was built to detect absence." There was a short, bitter laugh from the other side. "I'm going to escalate this internally. If they won't explain it, we'll freeze the contract until further notice." "I understand," I said. "Let me know if there's anything I can do, unofficially." "You've already done enough, Olivia." As the call ended, I stared at the quiet phone in my hand. The hum of the city below faded behind my thoughts. For the first time in days, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel erased. They had tried to sign my name off history, but they couldn't sign off the system without me. And now, the person they tried to hide was the very one their client was calling for, in the middle of the night. Not because I asked, but because the truth always dials back. At 6:02 a.m., Carrington's offices lit up earlier than usual, not with anticipation, but with dread. Chloe arrived before sunrise, her heels echoing down the marble floor of the executive wing, a large iced coffee in one hand and a trembling phone in the other. She didn't even bother with her usual morning strut. Her face was pale, eyes red from lack of sleep, or maybe from too many frantic calls that went unanswered overnight. She marched straight into the executive conference room, where Gregory was already pacing in his shirt sleeves, hair disheveled, a stain of something dark on his collar. The rest of the C-suite began trickling in, still zipping jackets, checking their watches, holding coffees they weren't drinking. The big screen on the far wall already displayed it. Aerotimes, the industry's most circulated online finance digest, had published a story just 40 minutes ago. Breaking Carrington Airseas. Fails to authorize $100 government deal due to internal security conflict. Sources allege the failure stems from a deliberately designed authentication protocol linked exclusively to a recently terminated executive. Gregory barked, "Who the hell leaked that email?" No one spoke. Chloe tried again to access the system, this time sitting at a spare desk with her personal laptop. She squinted at the screen, slowly typing in the admin credentials for the third time that morning. The cursor blinked. Then, access denied. Invalid biometric ID. Terminal mismatch. Incident logged. She slammed the laptop shut. "It's still locked," she whispered. Brent from IT looked like he hadn't slept at all. "Of course it is. The protocol was environment-specific. Only Olivia's original device can authorize." Gregory turned to him, furious. "Then find the device, clone it, reverse engineer it." Brent shook his head. "It doesn't work like that. The biometric lock is encrypted in the hardware and tied to her physical vocal signature and terminal MAC address. Even duplicating the machine won't get around it." Chloe's hands trembled slightly as she picked up her phone and began typing. Gregory caught her glance. "Who are you texting?" "The PR team," she replied quickly. "We need to get ahead of this." But it was already too late, within minutes. The story had spread. Blogs reposted it. Former employees shared it on LinkedIn. Twitter lit up with finance bros laughing at Carrington's tech-savvy downfall. Some even speculated Olivia had engineered it intentionally as revenge. Others just admired the irony. By 7:30 a.m., a second email made things worse. A forwarded thread between Brent, the compliance team, and Marcus at Constella Aerotech had accidentally been CC'd to the press. The subject line? "We can't override Meyer. Contract unexecutable. Keep this internal." It was over. Across the city. I stirred milk into my tea as I watched the sun rise over the skyline. The living room smelled of quiet, warm jasmine. My phone buzzed once, then again, then again. First, from Jacob. "They're freaking out. You're all over internal Slack. Aerotimes leaked the email chain." Then Marcus. "Heads up, your name is trending on 2 trade forums. The board's apparently in full lockdown." I didn't reply. I just set the phone down beside me and took a sip. The taste was smooth, clean. Let them scramble. Let them fumble for control over a system they never cared to understand. Let them regret choosing shortcuts over integrity. I had told no lies. I hadn't sabotaged anything. The system was working exactly as it was meant to, protecting a deal from unauthorized access, preserving the original terms. The fact that I was no longer inside the building was their mistake. They removed me from the narrative. But they forgot. I was the architect of the infrastructure. The more they tried to force the gate open, the louder it resisted. And now, the world was listening. The message came at 9:20 a.m. From Gregory Carrington, subject, request for meeting, urgent Olivia. We would appreciate the opportunity to speak with you regarding recent developments around the Aerotech contract. Please let me know when you're available today. Best, Gregory Carrington. No apologies, no acknowledgement of what they had done. Just a tidy, polished sentence asking me to come back, as if I were a misplaced document they needed help locating. I stared at the email for a moment, then typed one line in return. "I will meet. My attorney's office, 1 o'clock. The office of Miriam Hensley, my longtime personal counsel and one of the most meticulous contract lawyers in the city, was located in a modest brick building just off Lexington Avenue. Nothing flashy, nothing loud, but the kind of place that made executives sweat the moment they stepped inside. At 12:57, I arrived early and sat across from Miriam in the glass-walled conference room. She glanced at me over her reading glasses as I handed her a sleek brown folder. "Everything they need to see?" I nodded. and nothing more. At 1:03, Gregory entered, alone. His tie was loosened, the skin under his eyes purple with exhaustion. He looked less like the confident CEO who once stood on stage boasting about agility and innovation, and more like a man who hadn't slept in 3 days. He extended a hand. I didn't take it. "Olivia," he said, voice low, almost pleading. "Thank you for meeting. I know things didn't unfold the way they should have." I let silence stretch. He took the seat opposite me. "You know why I'm here," he said finally. "I do." He glanced at the folder Miriam had placed on the table. "Is that it?" I nodded once. Miriam pushed it toward him. Inside was a simple printout of a code ownership agreement, dated 10 months ago, signed by both me and the former CTO, confirming my authorship and conditional control of the Gateway Final Protocol. Also included was a digital timestamp, a third-party verification certificate, and a copy of the clause stating that no edits or overrides could occur without my consent. Gregory skimmed it, then pressed his hand to his forehead. "I need you to help us," he said, voice cracking slightly. "The client's threatening to walk. The press is circling. The board is panicking. We can't get through the final authentication without your voice. And Chloe, she's not ready for this." He looked up. "I know we made mistakes, but you built this company with us. We need you now." I sat back in my chair, keeping my tone even. "You didn't just remove me, Gregory. You erased me. No transition, no acknowledgement. You replaced me with a child in glitter heels and told the world she secured a deal she didn't even understand." He flinched. "You used my work, my systems, my name, until it was no longer convenient. And now, when the infrastructure reminds you who built it, you come running." He opened his mouth, but I raised a hand to stop him. "I'm not your backup plan. I'm not your emergency exit. And I certainly don't exist to fix the very consequences you created." Gregory glanced down again. "I'll authorize whatever bonus you want. Name the number." Miriam cleared her throat. "That won't be necessary." I stood slowly, smoothing the front of my blazer. "You had a chance to treat my legacy with respect," I said. "Instead, you traded it for optics." He looked at me, defeated. "So what now?" I walked to the door, paused with my hand on the knob, and turned back. "You wanted a future without me, Gregory. Now you have it." Then, with a final glance at the folder still open on the table, I said the only sentence that truly mattered: "Legacy isn't free." And I walked out. Outside, the sun had begun to dip just past the skyline. I stood on the sidewalk, breathing in the early afternoon air, surrounded by people rushing in every direction. But I felt still, clear. They had expected me to crawl back, to fix the fire they started and smile politely while doing it. Instead, I let the building burn on its own, because when you spend decades building something right, you don't need to scream. You just need to step back and let the cracks do the talking. By the time the official announcement dropped, I was already seated by the window at Camden Roasters, a quiet cafe on East 46th, sipping black coffee and reading the paper like it was any other Thursday. The morning rush had died down, replaced by the soft hum of typing laptops, the occasional hiss of steamed milk, and the dull clink of ceramic cups. It was a peaceful corner of the world. But inside Carrington, I imagined, peace was the last thing anyone felt. At 8:37 a.m., my phone buzzed, not with a call, but with a push notification. Constella Aerotech press release. Immediate distribution. Due to significant concerns regarding transparency, protocol integrity, and leadership transition mismanagement, Constella Aerotech has chosen to terminate the pending $100 million procurement agreement with Carrington Airsys, effective immediately. I blinked once, slowly, then scrolled further. The second paragraph said everything I needed to hear. While our team values the partnership efforts of Carrington's legacy leadership, the recent handling of key security operations has caused an irrevocable loss of confidence in the company's current direction. They didn't name me, but they didn't have to. They named what I represented: integrity, stability, clarity, and they also named what Carrington had become: uncertain, performative, hollow. Within 12 minutes, Carrington's stock dropped 6%. By noon, it had slid almost 9%. Analysts were scrambling. Reporters were calling it a wake-up call for legacy firms underestimating institutional knowledge. Twitter was another story entirely. Screenshots of Chloe's disastrous interview clip resurfaced, where she mispronounced Constella Aerotech and claimed she made the final call to close the deal early. One user posted, "Imagine losing a $100 million contract because you replaced your top exec with your niece, who can't say the client's name." Another followed up, "Respect to whoever coded that security lockout. That's how you walk away with power." I didn't comment. I didn't like or share. I just watched. Quietly. Across the table from me sat Marcy, a friend of mine from the non-profit board I joined last year. She glanced at my screen. "Is that the deal you were working on?" I nodded. "Is it bad that you're smiling?" I looked down at the corner of my lips. I hadn't realized I was. "No," I said. "It's not bad. It's just rare to watch consequences arrive on time." She gave a soft laugh, then returned to her coffee. By mid-afternoon, word broke internally that Chloe Carrington had been removed from all active projects, pending an executive review process. It was PR speak for exile, a shiny title on a door that no one would knock on again. Gregory, according to a source Jacob texted me, had called an emergency board meeting at 10:05 a.m. They'd tried to blame the failure on technical hiccups, a miscommunication between departments, but the board wasn't buying it anymore. There were screenshots, leaked internal emails, a growing storm of shareholders demanding explanations. Someone from compliance, likely Brent, had quietly passed on copies of the audit trail showing Chloe's failed attempts to override the Gateway Final Protocol. They showed timestamps, error messages, and system rejection logs. Everything pointed to one inescapable truth. They didn't lose the contract because of sabotage. They lost it because they had erased the one person who knew how to finish the job. I folded my phone, set it face down on the table, and let the silence settle. For the first time in days, no, in weeks, I felt the weight of it lift. Not revenge, not rage, just closure. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't threatened anyone. I hadn't exposed them publicly or run to the press with receipts. I'd done what they never expected. I walked away and let the foundation speak for itself. The truth always finds oxygen, especially when people try to bury it in silence and substitute it with spectacle. They thought I would need them. They never imagined they would need me. And now, in the aftermath, they weren't just losing money. They were losing credibility, face, confidence, the kind of damage that doesn't show up on a balance sheet until it's too late. The barista brought over a second coffee without me asking. I must have looked like I was staying a while. "On the house," she said kindly. "You look like you just won something." I didn't answer at first. Then I smiled, soft, subtle. "Something like that." And I took another sip, in peace. It's strange how the end of something can feel like the beginning of everything. A week had passed since the deal collapsed. 7 days since Carrington's name was dragged across every industry headline. Since Chloe disappeared from LinkedIn. And since the board released an internal memo using phrases like strategic restructuring and leadership reevaluation, corporate speak for "we messed up." I hadn't spoken to anyone at Carrington since my meeting with Gregory at Miriam's law office. I didn't need to. My silence, paired with the contract logs and the press fallout, had spoken louder than anything I could have said. There was no satisfaction in gloating, no urge to return. The victory had come and gone, and I didn't need to stand in the ashes to prove I'd survived the fire. Because I hadn't just survived it. I'd redesigned the entire architecture around it. On Monday morning, I received a call, not from a journalist, not from a former colleague fishing for gossip, but from Marcus Levinson, the senior procurement director at Constella Aerotech. We hadn't spoken since the night he called me in a panic. I expected a short courtesy conversation. Instead, his tone was calm, measured, precise, like the man I had once negotiated across a 12-hour time difference with in Munich. "Olivia," he said, "we've had time to assess everything, and the leadership on our side has made a decision." I waited. "We'd like to retain you," he continued, "not as a vendor contact, as an independent advisor, strategic counsel for our internal infrastructure team." I blinked. "You mean as a contractor?" "No," he said, "as a partner." There was a pause. And then he added, "With full discretion, a flexible contract, and a compensation package that, frankly, makes your last Carrington salary look like a rounding error." I didn't answer right away. I stood up from my dining table and walked to the window. The city was alive beneath me. Taxis darting across intersections, pedestrians crossing streets with coffee in hand. The same chaos I used to be buried under every day. Now, somehow, distant. "I appreciate the offer," I said slowly. "But you should know, I'm not looking to rebuild what I had. I'm not looking to replicate Carrington anywhere else." Marcus didn't hesitate. "We're not asking for that. We're asking for you, your judgment, your process, the part of the deal that never came from a dashboard or a title." He paused. "We know what we almost lost." Something inside me shifted. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about reclaiming status. It was about being seen clearly, without politics, without noise, without needing to raise my voice to be heard. "Send the paperwork," I said. 2 days later, I signed the agreement from a quiet workspace uptown. No cubicle, no lanyard, no fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Just natural light, my own desk, and a clean laptop with no system legacy haunting its settings. I chose my hours. I chose my clients. I chose my words. I wasn't anyone's backup plan. I wasn't a placeholder for a younger, cheaper version. I was the plan. And not because I demanded to be, but because I'd proven that systems don't just run on code or keycards. They run on judgment, on memory, on people like me, the kind who hold it all together quietly until the moment you try to cut them out, and the foundation caves. At 4:00 p.m. that Friday, I returned to Camden Roasters, the same cafe where I'd watched Carrington collapse on the headlines a week earlier. The barista remembered me. "Same table?" she asked. Smiling. I nodded. She brought over a cappuccino, and this time, a little chocolate square on the side. "On the house," she said. As I sipped, my phone buzzed. A text from Jacob. "Board replaced Gregory. Official as of this morning. New interim CEO is from outside. No mention of Chloe. They tried to clean up the wreckage. It just reminded everyone who caused it." I typed a short reply. "Told you. The system never forgets its author." I set my phone down and smiled. Nothing broad. Just the kind of smile that sits deeper. In the bones, in the spine, where power doesn't need to be declared. They thought forcing me out would erase me. They thought my silence was surrender. But the silence was the point. The silence was where the trap was hidden, and once it was sprung, I didn't need to lift a finger. I just needed to leave the room and let the system speak my name.